They're recording. Yeah, this is what they're saying.
So I gotta stand back. If I stand here.
Okay. I'm just gonna turn the air conditioning on. Let me go see if she has. Okay, you're recording. You're live.
Okay, we're ready to begin. Welcome everybody. I'm sure you had a big welcome with Laura Lee this morning. And to me, it's very exciting. We got people from all over the world here. We got Russia, we got Bogota, Colombia, Venezuela, Canada, Australia. I mean, where's our Australian friend? Down under. It's just really great. I mean, one night we had a 2-year meeting and they were thinking like 25 students on it and about 10 different countries represented. And this is just, it's a great feeling. So all of you new to the community, welcome. And all of you, I can stand back, all of you that are listening, I think it's called live streaming, welcome to the CC Institute. This opening to the conference is going to be about an archetype of orientation. That's my theme today. And the whole conference theme is the artistry of psyche, looking at archetypal patterns in literature, film, fable, life, and clinical work as well. But it's the artistry of psyche that we're really interested in. And we put together a really great faculty of literature professor, Jungian analyst, a filmmaker, another medical doctor who's also a Jungian analyst, and people that have really been studying this work in archetypal patterns for over 30, 40 years. So I'm looking forward to it. And usually when I give an opening talk, it's to orient people to the program, you know, what the big theme is. Well, you know what, I've been thinking a lot about it, and I want to talk about the archetype of orientation itself. Many of you have read Yoram Kaufman's book, The Way of the Image, and he calls it the orientational approach to dreams. I don't like the title very much, but it's a beautiful piece of work. What he's doing with that book, he's looking at images as having a certain meaning, a certain orientation to life, images of transitions, images of endings, images of beginnings. And he says it helps us to be oriented in life. Now, we all know that's a simple piece, but what I want to get at is something a little different. Now, in terms of being oriented, in the outer world, I'm not very oriented. I went to shine my shoes today. I bought new polish. I got brown shoes. And it just said cream. I didn't read the black cream in my brown shoes. So I kind of missed that little orientation. So if you see a little dark color in my shoes, it's because I missed that little orientational marker there. I think a lot about orientations, partly because my one simple personal reason is my sensitivity in the outer world is really pretty bad. More than that, though, I've been in practice about 35 years, raising my son as a married man, as a parent to now 2 stepchildren. And you look at how life confronts us with many things that we don't really know how to manage. And we often manage these things in our own habitual way. You know, we find that we do things the way we learned how to do things. We parent the way we've been parented many times. We raise our kids the way we don't want to do the same as our parents, but it's still caught within certain confines. We approach midlife. Many of us in this group, most of us, if not almost everybody here, has begun to approach the journey of midlife and beyond. You know, 60s and 50s, 60s and 70s, and life is very different. And I look at my father as a model who's 101, and Georgiana's mother recently passed away at 104. You know, and they have a story about life, is, you know, what it's like to live and have seen so much. Orientation. I grew up, and there was a neighbor from Calabria, Reggio Calabria, where my grandfather's from, and his name was Mr. Lorenzo. He grew up at a time when there were no airplanes. In his lifetime, he saw no airplanes. He saw the beginning of the first airplane. Then he saw the moon landing in one lifetime. How do you really put that together? And he did that all along wearing bowling shoes every day for some reason. Mr. Lorenzo's little, what's that?
He's a smart man.
It's smart man. But, you know, I think about how do you put that together? A cousin of mine said, you know, we had a party for my dad's 101 birthday party recently, and he said, Mike, you know, you were the first in the family that left the neighborhood. And we never had this conversation before. He said, you know, everybody stayed within the family, stayed within the neighborhood, got the jobs, is doing retail or the postman or whatever the particular jobs are going to be. And he said, you're the first that went to college and then beyond, and then kept on going to school and then left. And he said, it gave me courage that somebody really could do it because I never saw it in the family. You were an orientational marker for me. And when you think about the archetype of Orient, it means having a sense of where we are in our life vis-a-vis the world. I'll say it again because it gets me into where I want to go with this. Orientation means having a sense of our location and position in the world vis-a-vis the properties of the world itself. Now, those of you that do boating, I mean, I love boating, and you know, Max has been boating for many years on the river. If you're not oriented, you can get into a lot of trouble. I was fishing last week with a friend who knows the waters really well, and we found a spot where there are a lot of fish, a lot of big 20, 30-pound fish. And it happened to be on a reef system. And I hadn't discussed this with Laura Lee yet. And we cozied up to these big rocks, and the water is breaking over the rocks. You ever see that? It's a 12-foot rock, and the water is 20-foot spraying over the rocks, and the fish are like jumping over the boat, 20, 30-pound fish. And it's pretty exciting, and yet we know we're on a reef system. And reef system means there's a reef and a lot of rocks, and the fish are there, and the birds are there all feeding because there's a lot of bait right there. It's a lot of action at that spot. And you know you got to be careful. So when fish are there, you want to fish. And you also know you got rocks, and you got to be oriented. So I'm looking at the GPS system, which is the orient, right? How deep we are, where we are, how deep we are. And with 15, 20 feet, I'm good. 15, 20 feet watching. All of a sudden, it's 3 feet. And thank God it's a good boat, and we just butted in, and we got out of there really quickly. We lost orientation. We lost our orientation for a moment. And it's a incredibly productive spot, and it's a very dangerous spot. And I probably won't go back there unless I'm with somebody that really knows how to do it, or the way you need to do it to be oriented to that spot is you need somebody designated to drive the boat and not fish. And then you reverse roles. Okay, so Roxanne, you drive and we fish, then we reverse because you don't have any wiggle room. And it was another one of these incredible reminders of the need to be oriented. Now, most of us have GPS, what do you call GPS in cars, right? The GPS system on a boat, you have GPS, and what they do is they show you the contours of the bottom of the water, and GPS tells you where you are vis-a-vis your destination. And it's pretty incredible that you plug in an address or location, and it'll give you a straight line like some of these computer games, and you go right there. I think it's pretty wild that you can actually see the contours of where you are. That something will tell you where are there rocks, where are there eddies, where's there structure, where there's no structure. Sometimes you actually even see a submarine in the water underneath it. You see the long cigar-like structure. And there are many stories we could talk about where people's lives have been saved by following the GPS or the radar system. And a friend of mine was telling me the other day, actually somebody training at one of the young institutes, or one of this rough story, he was out fishing and the fog set in, which is one of the terrors for anybody that's in the water, whether you're sailing or whatever. When the fog comes in the ocean and you can't see your hand in front of you, it hasn't happened to me yet, but everybody that mentors you says it's going to happen. Be prepared. Well, anyway, this guy was going and he had a near miss recently. And he said he was being really, really cautious, and he's watching the GPS, the radar system. And radar has like these little things, like tiny, tiny dots that tell you there's something there. And all of a sudden, he saw the dot, 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 and a really like an inch-long thing on the screen. And there's no brakes on the boat. He stopped the boat immediately. And the friend of his that was watching in front suddenly went, looked straight up at a giant ocean liner being towed by, what do you call it, the tugboats. And they have the cables between them. If he had gone in at that point, and that's where a lot of people die, because you don't see the cables. You don't even know sometimes they're being pulled by this. And thank God he put the brakes on. Now, when we grow up in the early part of life, we're oriented to the world as people know it. We learn about our bodies. We begin with toilet training, and we begin with, a certain amount of domestication goes into the life of every infant. A little bit terrible to say, but a little bit like a pet. You really can't break this when you're a little bit older. We really don't want you just ripping things off the wall. Mommy loves that, daddy loves that piece or whatever, and please watch it. So we're oriented to the facts of our life. And if you think about much of early education and developmental education, we're being taught about the parameters of the world as it exists. We're learning about what happens when you're 5 years old, what happened. Mommies and daddies learn that when the baby becomes the toddler, and to anticipate someday that little toddler is going to climb up the stairs without you knowing it, and you've got to be prepared for that. And what happens when they begin going through the next stages of life. And what's interesting is you read the developmental books, sometimes you say, well, how do they know my kid would do this? It's because behavior is rooted within an archetypal field. Behavior, in many ways, is the epiphenomena of archetypal subsets. There are archetypes of behavior, there's archetypes of childhood and adolescence, and again, for many of us, there's archetypes of midlife and beyond. The education we have serves us really well to be oriented in the world, to know where the rocks are and the reef systems, and when certain things happen with our body, we begin to, that doesn't feel right, I want to go to the doctors, my eye's doing something funny, let me get it checked out. Then you have the explorers. And I was thinking the other day of the work of someone like, not someone like, but take the work of Darwin, where they go where hardly anyone ever went before. And he begins to map out what he sees. And he begins to draw it. And he said at one point, he said, what he wanted to do is he wanted to draw all the things he saw so that he could represent in history these new discoveries. And these, again, things that exist in the world. Even if nobody saw them before, there are these plants, or the platypus, or this kind of fish, or that kind of whatever, or the anthropologists that go into these tribes. And remember Jung's work, you may not know this, but Jung did not want to be a psychiatrist originally. He wanted to be an archaeologist because he was interested in the remnants of civilization. He wanted to see how people lived. He wanted to see how they developed cultures. And what many archaeologists do is they look at the remnants of a culture, from the coinage to the clothing, the decorations, and from that they begin to reconstruct the culture. Now it's interesting, in many ways, Jung really was an archetypal archaeologist, and he looked at the remnants of civilization through what? Through dreams and the psyche. Now when Jung began to begin teaching about archetypes, he took a road very different from Freud and anybody else who was practicing at that point. I mean, Freud, the more I age and the more I study, especially the work on memory and forgetting, I'm really impressed with his brilliance. Freud really studied the archetype of memory and the archetype of forgetting. And these are both Greek concepts, right? Yeah. Well, all the dreams for Freud were about things that happened to people. The drive, the forbidden desire, or the little fantasy you had that you can't accept because it doesn't fit the schema. And remember what happened with the break between Freud and Jung is when Freud said to him, look, you're really great at what you do, and I want you to be the heir apparent to this entire movement. But you need to uphold the sexual theory. And that was really the perturbation and the thing that really drove them apart. Because Jung couldn't believe that it was something like sexuality that could drive people. And Jung had this much bigger vision. He said, okay, well, clearly we all are interested in one way or another about sex, whether you hate it, you love it, you want it, whatever, there's a lot of action. And there's, I mean, just thinking in the world, the whole sexual industry, from the more pleasant, from lingerie to the pornographic, billions and trillions of dollars are spent on it. Father Bruce, I'm sure you've heard many confessions of people talking about these sort of issues and what they bring to confession about things about sex. Anyway, Freud literalized it. Freud said, this is about sex and desires and forbidden whatever. And Jung said, I can't go there. Jung said, if you look throughout history, as sex is one of many archetypal dominants, he said, there are so many stories about people coming together in ways that appear to be sexual, but are not sexual. And that's when he coined the whole concept of conjunctio. And he said, what we look at as sex, it's not sex, it's about two things, two people, two energies, two archetypal influences, two psychological aspects coming together to create a third, which is what St. Augustine said, when two become one. So there's something happening when these two people come together. Now, it's not all generative. As we know, many relationships are not generative. Some of them work and some don't work. In mythology, we have many stories of the prince and the princess, that the wonderful marriage and to be celebrated, and knows that to be dreaded because you know it's going to be a pretty damn bad marriage. But the point is that Jung understood that when you get out of the realm of the known and out of the realm of the literal, you begin to enter a world where there are more mysteries. That's not charted. That's the difference between the psychic GPS system and where we stand in the archetypal world. Now, with that little preamble, we can ask, well, why? What is it about that that's so important to us that we have a whole conference, we have a whole training program? This, almost everybody in the room are the graduates or candidates studying archetypal pattern analysis, and why? Well, one term that probably all of you know, even those that are live streaming, is when von Franz said archetypes are nature's constants. You know that, you heard it a million times. But what does it really mean for us to understand that archetypes are nature's constants? It's saying that there are these dominants in the human psyche that have been there from the beginning of time that inform us about the life journey. When one is out of step with that, we have problems. And remember, Jung went on to say that neurosis is being out of step with the archetypal. I mean, how many times have we seen older people, 60s, 70s, or whatever, trying to live like a young person? It's just not pretty. And it's not only that it's not pretty, there's something archetypally off about it. Now, one could say, now here's where we get into a lot of things going on in modern day Jungian psychology and current psychology in general. Who are you to say? Who are you to make the opinion? What's appropriate, not appropriate? Why does one become the arbiter of justice, the arbiter of truth, the arbiter of, is this really what your calling in life is about? When Jung and von Franz, and then I include all those early pioneers who I think were the best of us. Von Franz, Harding, Barbara Hanna, Nelia Yaffe, the greats, the real greats, because they knew that these things shaped the life. When they looked at archetypes, they were looking as though one would look to some kind of transcendent figure to say, look, I need some guidance. I've gone as far as I can with this. I've gone as far as I can with my understanding of a situation. And from the beginning of time, humanity has had ways of dealing with this. When we say, look, I don't know what to do right now. And if you look at history, what are some of the things we've done? We've had prayer. Prayer is one thing we do. When you have an intercession by a divine figure. God, please help me. Mary, help me. I don't know what to do. We have the I Ching. Mention the turtles, where they read the design of a turtle to get the sense of the hexagrams. They read the entrails of animals. They go to Delphi for the Delphic rituals and the Delphic oracles. So there's been something from the beginning of time where people look outside for some assistance. Now, if we just stay at that moment, okay? I've gone as far as I can, and I can imagine that many people in this room have hit a point in your life. I know I have at one point in particular, when I said, I can't do this. When you say, you know what, I don't know how to manage this one. This one is bigger than me. And at that point, you're brought to your knees. You're brought to your knees because you don't know how to move forward. And all the resources you have, all the resources that got you up the mountain and got you to where you are today, they suddenly pale in the face of this thing you've got to deal with. So what do? Where much of psychology goes today is that it says that when we begin to look towards something else for help, you're idealizing the fathers, you're idealizing the mothers, you're trying to create a God. There's a book called Faces in the Cloud by Stoller on Atwood. It studies in subjectivity. Faces in the Cloud. I'll give you the reference later if you want it. And what they do is they study the work and lives of many of the pioneering giants in psychoanalysis. They study Freud's life, Jung's life, Otto Rank, and I think Theodor Reich. No, Wilhelm Reich, I believe. And they look at their psychology and they look at their upbringing. And what they're trying to do is they say, well, based on their particular traumas and their psychological dynamics, that's why they developed these theories. Okay. So, for instance, they say a lot of Jung's work in having a sense of the self, having something to pray towards or pray to, and having something to say, look, can you help me? The dream. And sometimes the dream comes and you know your life is transformed by the appearance of something you never thought about before, a new way of dealing with life, a new way of dealing with the situation. Stoller and Atwood basically say that Jung's psychology, while interesting, it was a desperate attempt to find a father. So now you have the father in religion, the father in God. The father's going to answer all your greatest prayers. It's sort of an infantile fantasy. For Freud, religion was an infantile fantasy. We need something to make us feel better, so we pray to this thing we can't see, we don't even know what it is, but many people devote their lives to it. Return to center stage with Jung's life and his work. He was interested in the world of the constants, of regularities, okay? And he said, if something happened with a high degree of regularity, it must mean something. I mean, that's part of the definition I have in the first book I did about field, form, and fate, that patterns are collapsing into I forget the definition, but collapsing of trajectories into a regularity, into a pattern. And when Jung would see whether the issue of sexuality came up, the issue of religion would come up, he would then work in many ways like an archaeologist, say, okay, do we have any remnants of this issue anywhere else? And if we do have these remnants, what is it telling us? Do we have any remnants of a world where people believed in a God? And remember that one of the most famous interviews that we all know, the interview with John Freeman. I think it was Face to Face, right? When Freeman said, and Jung was an old man at the time, he said, do you believe in God? And it was just one of those precious moments where Jung just kind of stammered. It's like an old man, he like dropping a couple of words. And it took him a few minutes to get it. He said, no, I don't believe in God. Great Shakespearean pause, right? He said, I know there's a God because, number one, my own experience, but more than that, or in addition to that, he said every culture from the beginning of time has had some reference of a God figure. So we said whether there's a God in the outer world, we don't know. We know it's a fixture in the unconscious. It's a regularity in the human and the collective psyche. That's what he began to look at. So to answer my own question, why do we have a whole weekend and a whole training program where you guys are traveling, literally around the globe to get here? Why? Well, again, you have your own reasons. But what we've done and why we designed this program is because these archetypal patterns, which we're going to be discussing throughout this weekend, really teach us something about life that we probably don't know. Psychology, in many ways, is a science of what we have forgotten and what we may need to remember. And come up with your own calculation, come up with your own formulations. Okay, those of you that are musicians, and a couple of musicians in the room, you know, I'm sure at some point when you're sitting playing your instrument, you go down, you do your familiar riffs and your familiar whatever, and all of a sudden something happens to you. I used to be in a rock band years ago, yeah? and you're playing your stuff, you're playing, all of a sudden something happens, and you're on a track you've never been before. Something like on the winds of something, on the wings of some spirit that never played this particular sound before, these particular chords. And in many ways, I think that's a lot of what we live for right now, especially as we age. I mean, I'm talking a lot about aging. I'll be 65 in December, and you just see how life changes. You know, you just see that the contours of everything you knew have changed, and there ain't no game plan. And that's the thing I want to get at with being oriented about game plans, schematics, and where we stand. There are many references in the Bible of orientations. Now, they don't use that word, they use a different word. It's angels. And it was Kaufman that really made that correlation in his book, The Way of the Image. And he said, if you look at the representation of angels throughout history, and I'm not going to give the quote, it's not relevant right now, but he said basically angels are those psychic figures, psychic representation, which inform us about the coordinates of our life. Now, he was a physicist as well as a theologian and an analyst. But if we put in a little different term, get away from coordinates, the angel is the figure, the psychic figure that tells us about the life that we're living. And they can articulate things that we never saw. And there's so many wonderful representations in the Bible. One of the greatest, which we talk about in our program, is with Mary. I mean, this story on one hand is incredible. You got a 13, 12-year-old little girl, and suddenly she finds out, and when the angel Gabriel comes, he says, look, I got a story for you. You know, you may not believe this, but you're going to be carrying a baby. Okay, well, that's enough right there. A 12-year-old little kid carrying a baby with no sex and whatever. So, well, and there's more to the story. And Gabriel goes on, and he informs her about the life she's going to live and the life of this child. That this child you're going to adore, and this child is going to be the savior of the world. Okay, and at that point, she may have found the story a bit incredulous. Okay, so first you have the baby at 12 years old. There's no man involved. And then it's going to be the savior of the world. And then this child that you love more than life itself is going to be crucified. But if you think about the function, see, a lot of the brilliance of Jung was looking at the psychic functions of these figures. What do they provide in our life? Whether it's a translator, whether it's a bridge, whether it's a train station, whether it's a rental car, whatever, they all provide information about a facet of life. So what these angels do is they were telling Mary, in that one story in particular, they were telling her about a life that was going to occur to her. And they said, I want you to be oriented. Without orientation, you're going to go nuts. You know, there's no way you really can exist in the world without being oriented. And one of the other examples that Dr. Kaufman gave in his teachings, he said, why is it that so many astronauts have terrible trouble with alcohol, depression, and suicide? And he said it's because there's no way to be oriented. An astronaut has no way whatsoever to orient their experience. It's kind of like that incredible night on the Greek cruise ship, you know, the 2 weeks, and we had a wonderful time sailing the Greek Isles. There's nothing like it. And he says many psychotic experiences come when there's a lack of orientation. When people begin to have these seemingly bizarre fantasies, when people suddenly have these psychic identifications with I'm Mussolini, or I'm Hitler, or I'm Jesus Christ. Remember the Three Christs in Ypsilanti, a major book that came out back in the 60s or 70s. 3 people at the hospital in Michigan all believed that they were Christ. So there's a competition. three different Christs. But again, you see now where the Jungian comes in, and by the Jungian, let me define my terms. How I'm not my term, but how I'm looking at it. We have the original group of Jungian analysts. The names I mentioned, from the von Franz to Harding to Barbara Hanna and Yaffe and all of them. And I will include some of the work of Mary Woodman in that, and also with Hillman. What they were interested in was learning from the image, learning from the dream, something about the life that we may never know without that information. Okay? So they looked at this stuff, and they took it seriously. And something else that we need to begin to appreciate, I think, is that there is a tremendous shift going on in the field of Jungian psychology today, where Jung psychology was rooted in the world of the ontological, in the world of the morphological. By defining terms correct, ontological is the essence of something. Okay? English okay? Everybody there? Yeah. It means that there's an essence to something, that there's something in that image that is a pinkish color, a bluish color, springtime, winter, fall. And Jung spent his life studying these dominants of the psyche. Von Franz did it by virtue of the fairy tales. She studied, she said 66,000 fairy tales. I think they were competing. Jung had 65,000 dreams. She had 66,000. But what was beautiful was, if you ask what was she studying, what was beautiful about what her journey was she wanted to know what are some of these givens in the psyche. What are some of these features that have been with humanity from the beginning of time? And it's not just because of your mother and your father and your sister and your brother, not just because of trauma. I mean, we know these are shapers. But you see, where you look at the temporal shapers of human life, our family, our culture, our religion, the wonderful things, the traumatic things that happen, of course they shape us. But when you realize there's even something bigger at work than those particular temporal prompts, temporal events that shape you, it's a different perspective. So we look at the work of Jung and the early Jungian, and what they were studying was what's inside their psyche. And not just yours or your culture or your race or this nationality, that yes, each nationality, each group, each race has certain dominance, there's no question. But he also understood back then, as did von Franz, that everybody from the beginning of time had certain shared characteristics. That's what she was studying. You realize, and you begin to see that every fairy tale is telling something about a particular facet of life. That's ontological, a particular facet of life that represents a regularity in the life of everyone. At some point, everyone is going to have the journey of leaving home, you know. At some point, there will be the prodigal son or the prodigal daughter coming back home after the journey, after whatever they've been through. At some point, your kids get married and they have their own kids, you know. Our 2 boys just bought homes past month. It's just incredible, helping them furnish their homes. And you look at what they're doing and you realize it's their home, their life, their marriage. But when you have this kind of double vision or triple vision, you realize it's not just their own life that they're living. They've entered a realm of life that people have known about from the beginning of time. When you choose, when something in you finds a partner and say, you know what, this is who I want for my life. I want to share my life with this person. We had a woman in Italy, Tiffany, maybe I don't know if Tiffany's listening, from South Africa. And she's very big. She's probably getting ready right now to have babies. And I said, you know, look at that little hunk of love. You carry it in there, you know, and think about what it's like when you make the decision with you and your husband. Many times, sometimes decisions, and I'm not, but say, you know what? I want to make a family with you. And you realize at that moment, you've suddenly transcended temporality. You've suddenly left just the realm of your feelings and your needs and the joy you feel or the terror you feel, all of the things that come. You're in that, but you also into something bigger, which is the feel of one choosing a partner or having the gift of a partner come into your life. And then you say, you know what? We want to make another life together. And think of all that it takes when you say to somebody or ask somebody, can we make a baby together? And you see, at that moment, you really got a foot in both worlds. The world of here and now. Can we afford it? Do we have a home? I'm going back to school. I'm still involved in this project or that project. I'm terrified. Whatever. That's all part of it. But the other foot is you enter the world of eternity and the world of archetypes, where you suddenly enter that domain where people have been from the beginning of time when they say, we're going to make a family. And at that moment, you become inundated with all the properties that go with it. Now, for one person, it may be just riddled with fear because of your personal experience. Another person, it just be cockeyed optimism. For somebody, it may be some healthy combination of the two. But the point where one goes through some mating process and mating ritual, and from the birds that show their feathers and the birds that, I remember one great story that I think it was Adolf Portman, the zoologist, talked about, where the male bird was trying to prove it's going to be a good partner. So it goes to the female. So what do you want? What can I do for you? The bird says. And what the male bird, he says, oh, I guess I'll bring worms. And he brought 1,000 worms in 2 days. Then he died. He died of exhaustion. But she knew he would have been, if he had lived, he would have been a really good partner. Now, it's a kind of funny story, but what it does point toward are the archetypal roots of experience. Now, those of us that are clinicians or patients or some combination, and some people come into this program and not therapists, it doesn't matter. However you want to apply this work, doesn't matter. What you're looking at is there are a series of regularities that go with every archetypal experience. When someone comes to you and they're saying, well, I'm thinking about getting married, sticking with that example for a minute. What's opened up for you at that moment, say you as a pattern analyst, okay, is the world of marriage, the world of courtship, the world of saying, would you accept me as your partner? Would I be a good partner for you? And are you a good partner for me? Do I trust that we really could do this well together? And especially if we're going to think about bringing that new life into the world. Now, whether symbolic or literal, it doesn't matter here. But the point is, at that moment, as a pattern analyst, this person is in a very particular field, the field of courtship, the field of conjunctio. Once you enter that field, there are certain activities and dominants that are part of that system. So if someone has entered that, say you're thinking about getting married, we're thinking about having kids, and you look at their life and behavior, and you find it's utter puer. Remember the term puer? The puer, the eternal child. Well, we're going to go off. We're going to do this. We're going to do some more drugs. We're going to do this. I don't care about the money. I don't care about that. And you realize, it's a kind of simpler one here, but when you realize that at that moment, what befalls the individual are all these archetypal universal properties that you need to find a way to navigate if you're going to enter that field. The same way when someone makes a decision to enter a religious order. I mean, just think, we've had that from the beginning of time, from the monks to the Desert Fathers to the great nuns and Hildegard. The sort of Hildegard the Bingham, the incredible story of her life, what she did with her life. And you begin to find that there are certain things, individually, yes, individual issues, no question, but there are still some dominants that you have to wrestle with. So what you begin to look at is you're looking at the life of the individual and you're looking to see, is there an alignment with that archetype? Now, strange as it may seem, but within a number of Jungian circles today, there's talk such as there's no archetypes. There's just a cultural unconscious. There's a social unconscious. Are you trying to say that there are regularities in the psyche? And I think it's important that you know that debate is going on in the field today. Not about drawing lines in the sand and all that kind of stuff, but do your work, do your scholarship, do your own personal experiences and see that, my God, these things hit us at times like a brick, and they draw us into something we didn't even know what it was. I mean, from the biological domain, I've been interested in biology for a long time and some of the sciences. There is so much evidence of the fact that there are regularities in the human condition. From blood levels to heart levels to enzyme levels, all of it. And you begin to find, of course, there's individual variation. And a lot of talk about cholesterol. Some people say, well, too many doctors are saying, well, if it's in this range, you're okay. And they kind of forget that there's a bigger picture. But there are regularities, growth processes. And the way we're often able to make an assessment that there's something off with the individual is by saying, where are you vis-a-vis this sort of regularity? Well, hearing is usually a certain range of hearing. And I mean, simple, right? You don't hear anymore. There's something up with the hearing with this. I noticed recently my peripheral vision to my right is not that good anymore. And I was a basketball player. I played really good ball. I was able to pass blind passes like that. I can't see that way anymore. So it's when you have the grid of a big picture of a life, a vision of hearing, whatever you see on that level, there are certain things that go with it. And when something begins to vary, there's something up. So it's the same when the client comes to you, whether a younger person or a person in the second half of life, is they don't engage in the archetype of courtship, the archetype of marriage, the archetype of preparedness for this. There's something off. I've got a very good friend in Portland, Oregon, and he asked me to be the best man for the wedding years ago. He was 70. If you're here listening, great. He was 70. I think his wife was 60. He had a very big career as a judge. Well, I love this man very much. And he said, would you do it? I said, of course, it'd be an honor. And he said, well, I can tell you right now, but we don't want any gifts from people. We don't want any gifts. Because we're old, we have plenty of resources, we don't need the money and all that kind of thing. And I did my research. And what I like to understand precedents. No matter what it is, a precedent. Now, I'm not looking to be defined by precedent. I'm not looking to make my decision by precedent. But I want to know, how do these things usually happen? If you're having a banquet dinner, how do you usually do it? If you're having dinner outside, do you usually have different kinds of wine? What's common? In the Italian culture, I'm sure in the Colombian, the Venezuelan culture, the Australian culture, there are certain dominants. But I want to know what the precedents are. So I went back and I did some work and I said, okay, number one, what is the best man for? You see that it's like archaeology in that way? And it's not trying to make it heady. It's not trying to make it academic. I want to understand the field that I'm entering, the field that I'm being asked to participate in. And I want to know, can I satisfy the mandates of that field? Now, let me back up. Explain what I mean. As I said, with marriage, whatever, every field has their own innate mandates. And what we look at as pattern analysts, as therapists, as parents, is the individual satisfying the mandates of that initiative. If you're going to be a young musician, hopefully you better be knocking on doors. Dominique has a great career. We get to hear her this weekend a little bit with a beautiful Celtic harp. And if you want to make it, there are things you got to do. First, you got to learn your craft. And if you don't learn your craft, what are you doing? And that means many years of training, many years of practicing, many years of mentoring or training with the master, right? And then you begin the process. And again, you can mark it. Now, it's not predictable, but there are regularities that everybody in these different professions, that one way or another, you had to negotiate agents. You got to negotiate fees. You got to negotiate when you do it for free. You got to negotiate a million things. If the goal is I want to do my craft and I want to make a living with my craft. Okay? So where Jung comes out with this stuff, which I think is really fantastic, and I still hold to it. And in that sense, I don't stand in the crossroads of the transition going on in the field. I don't find the subjective stuff compelling. I really don't. I'll put my cards on the table. When we go about making meaning, what's marriage for you? And if marriage for you reminds you of a terrible thing you grew up with, so you approach marriage through that lens. If marriage for you is just wonderful because you have loving parents, okay. There's still a marriage separate from your experience. Of course, your lens is going to be, and there's a great story a colleague wrote about growing up, and he said he loved opera. He loved opera. And the parents would bring him to many operas. And what he would do is he'd say, there's one opera I want to hear. And he would listen to 10 different people perform that opera. Okay. I happen to love Gorecki's Third Symphony. I don't even know that piece. The Symphony of Sorrowful Songs is very powerful. And what I do is I get on a jag and I listen to all people playing it, all different sopranos doing the lead in it. And what he said was what I learned in listening to many and attending many operas or listening to many recordings of the same piece, for instance, is every performer and every conductor would do a little bit differently. Maybe suspend that note, or maybe just elongate it, or hold that note, or make it a little bit shorter, make it a little bit louder. Maybe the soprano jumped over that note more quickly. And he said, but however, even with all the individual variation, you still knew there was it was still La Bohème. It was still a certain aria that's very famous. It's still this particular song. So in many ways, it's a great way of beginning to capture this sense of what is archetypal. Archetypal is there is a certain refrain. There's a certain storyline. And again, when we look at what I would say, okay, the greats in our profession, they studied this. And when you look at von Franz's work on fairy tales, what she was studying were all the particular dominants that are part of the human condition. There are so many different variations of mother-daughter relationships, of father-son relationship, mother-son, daughter-father. And you have as many variations, you have as many fairy tales and legends and biblical tales that tell the story of the father's daughter. And you begin to see there are certain regularities that go with it, certain ways that the little girl, the young lady, begins to navigate these waters. And what she began to do, as what Jung did with dreams and studying alchemy, he said, okay, what are these universal processes that need to be understood if we're going to make this particular journey? Long story short, that's what this whole weekend's about. And that's what the work on archetypal patterning is about. And what von Franz and Jung and the early Jungians sought to do was draw us into an alignment to these archetypal regularities. That was a major piece. And where a lot of that now is being tossed up for grabs is the sense that there's no regularities in human condition. It's all variation. Whether dream images, whether life situations, and we can navigate them any way we want to. Now look, this is not in any way an homage to rigidity, you know. It's not at all a way of trying to curtail people's freedom. But when you see what happens when somebody is in a particular journey of life and they continue veering off it to be something different. Again, those of us that are aging, and you see the dreams that come when they say, you know what, you've gone too far in this direction. You need to come back home, and you need to pay attention to this. Or some people that are younger in the audience, and you see the dreams or life situations, say, no, man, you're missing the path. And you say, well, what about my path? And what about this? This takes us back to the opening of orientation. What is it we orient to as we age? And even for young people in a lot of ways. But the major thing is, once we learn the parameters of the reef system, okay, once we have a sense of the psychic GPS of what's around us, once you learn all the chords and the different melodies, the Celtic melodies, the Latin rhythms or whatever, you then enter a different domain. And that's a domain that Heschel and others call the ineffable. When we learn the parameters of the world around us and we can negotiate that fairly well, we satisfy the first half of life activities by doing the things that one kind of needs to do, another part of life opens up. And it doesn't have, there's no GPS to that one. That's why they talk about midlife crisis, midlife transition, midlife challenges. It's because there's no storyline. The storyline is that you can't do it the same way. The storyline is when you can't depend on any fixed set of coordinates to tell you how to live your life anymore. So what you look towards is, how did the ancients do it? Now, for some people, that's an assault to their freedom. Why do I need to see what the other people did? Why can't I just do it my own way? There's something profound about looking at how history reveals the archetypal tenets of life. See, history can be repressive, history can be fictitious, okay? But when you look at the regularities that went in history, especially in life, in the life experience of individuals and collective, you realize that there's following a certain theme in life. So now, how do we begin our study? How do we continue our study? Look at some of the constants that we live with. What are some of these dominants that are part of the life situation? Now, I'll give a few of these, okay? Now, I grew up Roman Catholic. Now, one thing we learned, which many of us fought against, is the idea of premarital sex. Now, it's interesting. When you look at it from the personal perspective, you have one whole set of coordinates, one whole set of reactions. If you step back and say, is there something psyche is trying to teach us with these commandments, with these principles? Now, again, I want to play both sides. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to find the commandments to tell you how to live your life? You're trying to say there's something telling you what to do with your life? The point is, there's been wisdom from the beginning of time, and looking at archetypal patterns is a way of getting back into the wisdom tradition and saying, what is it that psyche has known, which has now been conserved through myth, legend, and many of these sacred stories. These are psychic stories about regularities in life, in nature. So when we look at it, and we, of course, we have our own reactions and all the people running to confession for doing X, Y, and Z. If you look at it and ask, what might psyche be trying to teach you with a practice such as this? You have a very interesting answer. It's saying, don't merge. Don't prematurely merge with somebody. Don't prematurely jump into the world of the sensual and miss the issue of connection and rapport. We forget this stuff. We forget it because we run it through the lens of what I want to do, and the hormones are going nuts, and everything is wanting to literalize things, and we forget that these tenets, these archetypal principles have been there to teach us. So when we continue to run them through our own personal lens, we miss the bigger meaning. I was invited to go to this group of Augustinian priests in Chicago about 10 years ago to just talk about these kind of issues. And I said, well, let's talk about some of the major dominants of the religion, people in novitiates, people coming into the priesthood, whatever. And I said, for instance, what about poverty? What does it mean? No poverty, have poverty, no sexuality, and many other ones. I said, okay, let's look at poverty. And I asked some people that were studying to be priests, and they said, it means you have no money. I said, okay, that's really funny. Okay, well, what's it mean that you're pledging or whatever, taking the vow of poverty? Well, it means you have the money. Okay, let's move on. What's it mean you take a vow that there's no sex? What's it mean? Well, we don't have sexuality, we don't have sexual practices, people. I said, I think I'll take a break. And I went to go talk to the fellow that invited me, a wonderful guy that's been through the program years ago. And I said, Gary, you got to talk to me. Is this like a comedy routine here? That this is what they really believe? I said, Marco, I hate to admit it. This is what people are being taught today. They're not being taught the spiritual principles underneath these vows. So, where we're young and the great ones came in, it's, okay, what would it really mean if you're being told, and we've had these principles from the beginning of time, is it really just about oppression? Is it really just anti-body, anti-sexuality, anti-riches, anti-money, anti-materialism? So many of these are part of the personal lens. Come back. And when you look at the archetype, you say, okay, what's the issue? And one of the ways I find helpful in approaching is I say, if this is a dream, what's the storyline? It means keep a little distance. Hold hands, hug, kiss, spend time together, take drives, take walks, maybe cuddle. But there's something about, it's not sex, it's something about the moment of prematurely having that conjunctio before you know the other person. I mean, think that all it takes, as I said, with somebody having a baby, all that goes into that what you need to know about the other person and the other person needs to know about you. How easy is it to jump into each other's skin and miss all these rites of passage that you got to go through? Psyche and nature has set up these beautiful practices for us to learn something about it. The same with poverty. It's not a glorification of poverty. It's saying one needs to understand something about the relationship to the material world. Now, one other one I thought a lot about that I want to present a little bit more in detail is from a wonderful, wonderful book called Memoir in Two Voices. Okay? It's written by Elie Wiesel and Francois Mitterrand, the former prime minister or president of France. And it's the story of two absolutely brilliant men who are wrestling with some major life issues. And many people never knew that Mitterrand was a Catholic scholar. Now, this is not about Catholicism, it's not the point. It's about archetypal issues. At one point, they begin talking about religion, and Mitterrand said, I have a question. Now, I'm going to ask you as a Jew, says to Wiesel. He said, what would it mean if humanity did not have a redeemer? If we didn't have somebody that died for us, gone on a cross and all. Now, again, so before people think, well, Michael's off on some Catholic jag or some religious thing, it's not the point. I'm trying to understand some of these archetypal tenets of humanity by seeing some of these stories that have been with us from the beginning of time. The redemption and crucifixion has been with humanity from the start. One of the oldest stories we have. And Mitterrand says, and I think it's absolutely brilliant, he said, number one, what are we living with when there is a sense of a redeemer? Number two, how would humanity be different if we didn't concretize this? So now on one hand, if you look at redemption archetypally, right? Now every culture has some version. I mean, the Jewish have a very different story about redemption, right? They don't have so much, they don't have the person that died for their sins and all. It's much more of an individual relationship to God with this. When we can peel back for a moment all of the personal layers to the story, what's it mean for you, the redemption? What's it mean that we had a redeemer? What's it mean that Jesus died on the cross and all this stuff? We're going to run through all of our own stories. We're going to run through our own feelings, our own religious background, our own personal background, and we're going to just go off on that. And if we're in therapy, people are going to say, well, it sounds like you really don't like this or you really like it, and here's your issues. Maybe it's about your father, about your mother. Your father didn't fight for you enough. Your mother didn't protect you enough. When we step back and you realize, my God, these are stories that have influenced humanity from the beginning of time, why don't we take the time to understand what the story is? Because it shapes us. If you look at redemption, you look at expiation of guilt. They go together. Humanity has looked towards ways of expiating guilt from the beginning of time because we need to find ways of dealing with transgressions. That's an archetypal issue. Everybody's got a transgression somewhere. We've all transgressed something in our life. And again, Father Bruce, I'm sure you've heard many people in your confessional talking about transgressions. We struggle with it. When you peel it back even more and say, what is the archetype of redemption about? Why is it that we have this incredible story Whether you believe it or not, it's a story that has been compelling for people for how many thousands and thousands of years, that somebody died for your sins. And the question that Mitterrand is asking is really asking us to open this whole thing up in such a big way. And where Jung comes in center stage, okay, what are we looking at archetypally? Now, redemption, remember, archetypally it's a breaking of the spell. This is straight out of von Franz's work, Redemption Motifs and Fairy Tales. Redemption is breaking of a spell. When we're under the spell of a complex, under a spell of an incredible mood that we can't break, under something that's just seeming to just take us over and we can't get out of it. There's some ways we find to get out of the spin of that redemption. He then goes on to ask, what has that provided for humanity, with the sense that there's some external figure that's offering us redemption? And let me pause for a minute and somebody give me an answer with this. What would you say?
Example?
Well, not so much example, but what is one inference we live with when we say, when we have this model that says somebody died for your sins, how does that then get implanted into the psyche? In both generative and non-generative ways.
Maybe the generative is that there's a possibility of wholeness, in completeness, that it is attainable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Okay. What else?
A way to move forward. There's a way to move forward. No guilt.
If there's no guilt, there's a way to move forward, a belief that's going to be different.
It's also maybe it's making a bridge between conscious and unconsciousness, because it's in some way somebody knows something that you don't know.
Yeah.
Like an orientational marker we're talking about.
Of what? Of what?
Of the path to connect to your soul on a deeper level. That whatever shadows you're dealing with or you're not conscious of, they can become conscious and you will be welcome to a higher level of consciousness.
Take the shadow side of it for a minute. What's the other side? If you live, what might be one of the shadow ways that humanity has taken us in? When you believe that there's somebody. You see, these are the kind of questions that humanity has wrestled with, that coming back to us in many ways right now.
The question is, can anything be forgiven?
Yeah. And can anybody do it for you? This goes back to the whole thing that Jung talked about with the belief in God and the fact we've had a God concept from the beginning of time. And, an article I threatened to write for a long time is if God was made of Teflon. If only God was made of Teflon, all these projections wouldn't stick, right? They wouldn't stick. Everything that sticks on it, from God that's vengeful, a God that's whatever, and God that justifies all the things that we do in the world. So a shadow side of maybe how we've taken this in, because there's redemption somewhere. But when we are aligned to these archetypal things, these archetypal issues in ways that are non-generative, we then personalize and we forget the deeper meaning, which is it's a model to be emulated. That one goes through so much work and sacrifice, leaving the Father world, leaving all the stuff that we have in the Jesus story to find redemption. And many of us, I think, still live in a very infantile way with this. I mean, you want an example, look at what happens in therapy for many people. How many of us really take the time to wrestle with some of these deeper life issues? From midlife to death to transitions. And I try to come home with this, and it's not a question of malicious intent. I think we're poorly aligned. And I think in many ways, where we're going with psychology today, with the overemphasis on the personal, I think we're going to get into more and more hot water with this. Because we're not learning that there's something beside the individual psyche that's going to dominate our life, that can orient our lives. We're missing that. So whether it's a dream, whether it's a complex, whether it's a fantasy, that's going to try shifting your life. And you begin to look at people that come to us for help. In the beginning of time, when people came to the Asclepian healing spas, they came for one reason. And it's the Asclepians that are really our grandparents. They came because they were out of touch with the divine. That was the reason people went for healing in the beginning of time. And they saw all the symptoms, from broken arm, bad arms, or barren, or whatever the particular issue might be. It's because of being out of step with something. And there's something very difficult, and I certainly admit this for me as well. There's something very difficult about being able to be that humble to something that's trying to shape your life. You know, because we hold on to our beliefs, we hold on to the way we live our lives, we hold on to all these sacred cows that we've established for ourselves. And I think one of the most beautiful models of where redemption comes from in the whole redemption and the crucifixion story. And it was Ann Uleroff that taught this one, a brilliant Jungian from New York. She asked you, where was there redemption in the crucifixion story? And there's all Jungian little puppies. We had our own versions of it. And she said the redemption came when he had nothing to believe in. When Jesus said, why hast thou forsaken me? And in many ways, it's a beautiful model for what happens when we let go of our sacred cows and you let the image shape you. And I mean, many times, I know how much I and other people wrestle with a destiny that's waiting for us, a way of life that we're meant to live, and you just don't want to do it. And you struggle and you fight, but hopefully you know at least what you're fighting against, and you know when you're losing it. You know when you're losing that fight. When you should be practicing another 4 hours a day, but you don't because of whatever. You know you should be duct taping yourself to your desk to do the work you're supposed to do, that writing that's really meant for you to do, and you know the soul and the heart and whatever you want to call these things, God, transcend, it's calling you to do this piece of work, but because you got these other agendas, you don't do it. And so all the battles, all the things we see from stories of the protagonist, antagonist, from mythology to fairy tales, to the wrestling in the desert, you begin to see part of the human condition is wrestling with these forces that we don't want to accept. You see, where Freud came in is, for him, it was wrestling with the instinct of life. It was a great beginning, great beginning. We wrestle with the instinct of life, wrestle with how do we come to grips with the different things that are working through us, okay? Power, drive, hunger, sex, whatever. Jung's piece came in, and the thing I continue to love in this, and I began when I was really young in this field, for better, for worse. It's like no matter where you are, this door continues to be knocked on by something or by someone. And the story you hear is something is starting to get in and say, this is not the way to live it. This is not the way you need to go about your life anymore. And how many times when you find yourself caught in a complex, caught in something where you just can't seem to extricate yourself from, an image comes that gives you a marker as to how to begin making a transition. Next piece is, where does humility come into this? And where does learning and humility in here come together in the following? When I spoke earlier about whether it's a marriage or whether it's a career or a destiny, and we realize there are certain things we have to do to engage that and to satisfy the mandates of that field. So much of the brilliance of Jung is in saying that these archetypal dynamics are represented by symbols and story. We know that, okay? Archetypal dominants are represented by symbols and stories. It takes something very different for us to get inside that story. And I was just teaching the other day at one of the institutes, and we're talking about the Oedipus story. And I said, well, you know, if someone dreamt of Oedipus, what's the story? Now, again, let me play devil's advocate. There's no one story. There's many stories. There's many pieces to Oedipus, right? There's his mother, there's the father, there's his children, there's on and on and on. So how could you say there's one piece? When you begin to say that there are these archetypal patterns that are part of humanity and they're represented through these universal stories, and that's why I have the people I do this weekend as faculty. Maureen, she's a Shakespearean scholar. I mean, she went to the Shakespeare University of Great Britain, the one and only, to study these stories. These are universal stories. And what you begin to find when you really entertain this world of archetypal patterns is that there's something inherent in that story. There's something in that story, like a cup, whether it's coffee, whether it's whiskey, whether it's cider, whether it's a great wine, whatever, there's something in that story. It asks something different from us. The bifurcation point in Jungian psychology is the following. Jung's work, the early Jungian's work, was what is in that story? What is the dominant story here? What is the dominant issue in that particular image or that particular kind of fish, from the salmon to the shark to the whale to the blue whale to the great white, whatever? What is the dominant story? And Jung spent a life, as I said, with von Franz, with the fairy tales, Jung with dreams and alchemy. They wanted to understand what were these, the opening term I gave, nature's constant. What are these constants that are part of the human condition that are represented by these stories? Now, the other side of the bifurcation point is the Oedipus, as any of these stories, could be about anything. Where are you aligned? Maybe for you, it's the mother. Maybe it's a mother-son or father-daughter relationship. Maybe for you, it's about X or Y, and we go around and we go around, and we're going to see where you land, like a little bit like a roulette. Wherever it stops, nobody knows, but where it stops is going to be where you stop with the story, where it's relevant for you, and that's where we stop it. Let's go where I think it gets profound. I was talking to this group, and I cited the work of a colleague, a Jungian analyst named Richard Nicoletti. He's a Jungian analyst out of Boston, a lovely, lovely man, and did his training later in life. And he did a wonderful dissertation on Oedipus. And he told a story, and I felt a little bit ashamed that I didn't know the story. Like many of us, Oedipus, he took the eye out. Right? Well, he poked his eye out at one point, right? Well, my father's got one eye, so maybe it's the story for me. It's the one-eyed person. And we know we slept with the mother. There's a big one. Okay, so, we focus. The great ones, whether it's Mitterrand, whether it's Wiesel, whether Kaufman, whether Jung, whether von Franz, they say, let's step back. What field are we in when you're in the field of Oedipus? Now, again, there's a lot of clearing out we got to do, okay, to at least entertain where we're going, where I think where Jung was with this. By clearing out, I don't mean dismissing. We got to clear out first and deal with all of the alignments you have to the story. Whether it's a story, like Laurel's doing a great piece of work on Salome, okay? So on Salome, on Athena, on Medusa, whatever. So we look at all of our things, all the things we think about Medusa, we think of the hair, and she terrifies people, we turn to stone, and all of that. There's a story independent of our fiction. Okay, that's the big piece with this. And that's what a lot of the dream work is about that we're doing in a dream training program, that there's a story independent of our story. So we go through our alignments. We go through everything we think. What Salome, for the Italians, and maybe salami, you think about, it could be a million different stories. But then you realize there's a story there. So now with Oedipus, how do we find out what the story is? You got to go back. And some of you know the history of that story. The story is not really just about Oedipus and his mother. The story goes back because everything that happened in Oedipus's life was a living out of a curse that was done to his father. Okay? His father was cursed by something he did. Freeze frame that moment. We also then want to look at what happens to the progeny of the mother-son relationship. In other words, study the lives of the three or four children, right? Of the 4 kids that were produced through the union of Oedipus and his mother, as a way of looking at how does a psyche tell the story of an unimaginable transgression. And one of the things we see in these fairy tales is a telling of what happened around these various trajectories of life. If you're in this field of X, in this field of Y, there are certain things that will befall you that are likely to be part of your story here. So the main issue you get when you begin to peel back all the emotional issues we have with the story, all whatever our associations are, all the alignments which we need to acknowledge, of course, and then say there's still a bigger story, which is the father. And many of you know the story by now. Oedipus's father was asked by the king to mentor the son, mentor the king's son into manhood. Well, what did he do? Oedipus's father sexually abused the kid, and the boy eventually killed himself. The king found out about it, and he said, I'm not even going to kill you. I'm going to give you the worst curse you can imagine. Your son someday. Now imagine the father hearing the story. And this is where we got to see that these are not just some remote, crazy stories, as we're going to hear with the Shakespeare story. This is real life. The real life played out against the backdrop of a universal archetypal story. It's the archetype then manifesting in the life. So think about it. Somebody then says, you know what? Your son will kill you someday. And another part of the curse is someday your boy is going to sleep with his mother. Then we find out with the life of Oedipus, what does he do? Well, he lives out this curse. As though following some predetermined script, he lives out a life where he eventually meets the father, they have discord, they have arguments, he kills the father, and then eventually he does the unimaginable, sleeps with and begets 4 children with the mother. So if anybody comes to you with a story with an Oedipus, I had to dream of Oedipus. I don't know what the hell it's about. I don't know why I dreamt of this. And again, I know this is a controversial way of looking at things. There is a dominant theme to that story. And one of the great things Jung said about Freud, he said one of the limitations of Freudian psychoanalysis is that Freud didn't have a sense of history, nor did he know his mythology, or did he know his religion. It all got reduced very quickly. And for him, I mean, Oedipus became, and this is something Dr. Kaufman railed against for years. We almost everybody, when we're doing our training with a therapist, whatever version therapy you do, analyst, whatever, we hear Oedipus, we hear you suck with your mother, right? Or it's your mother desire. And I remember when I was in analysis in New York, my analyst, I guess he began thinking that he wants to deal with my Oedipal issues. And he said, Michael, so you want to sleep with your mother? I said, no. He said, I bet you really want to sleep with your mother. I said, no. And he went on for 2 weeks. He said, are you going to finally admit it? I said, you want to know the truth? It wasn't my mother. It was my aunt I was interested in. My aunt. Scribbling those notes pretty quick. Aunt Judy, if you're listening, yes, you know this, Aunt Judy. She captured that piece. But you see, it gets reduced, and that's where these beautiful universal issues get reduced to the lowest common denominator. And look, whether we believe it or not, we still practice as Freudians when we look at Oedipal complexes. Let's talk about you and your mother, okay? What's going on with you and your mom? A beautiful mom. What's the story here? The story is very different when you look at the archetypal story. The archetypal story, it's a son who's living out the father's curse. the curse that was given to the father. And imagine if you're working with, say, the man or even a woman, doesn't matter that sense of gender, a man or woman who has that dream. There's one major thing you want them to know. So let's say they create transgressions and they did whatever. There's one major issue you need to say to them, which is these transgressions are really, yes, you did them, but you've been possessed by a field of the curse of your father. You've been living out your father's curse. And I've worked with enough people at this time, and at this point in my career, to see that many people's lives are the unconscious embodiment of the transgressions of the fathers and the mothers. I mean, do you realize the liberation that comes to say, look, yeah, you did X and Y. I got it. I see what you did. I see the transgressions. Do you realize that you've been unconsciously following the steps of your mother or father, did whatever? Whether it's through the drunken homicides that you've been involved, the drunken homicide you've been involved in, whether it's ruining your life and your career, whether it's the marital transgressions or the financial indiscretions. Well, you say, so Michael, you're trying to take responsibility off the person. No, ultimately it's your responsibility. But to realize you haven't even had a personal life yet. That's got to be devastating for somebody to realize in their 40s or 50s, say, you ain't even have your own life yet. You haven't moved out. There's one case I worked on where the person was second to Bernie Madoff. Remember Bernie Madoff? Well, this guy had stolen millions and millions of dollars from the elderly. Went to jail, did jail time, got out, moved to Europe, built this palatial, multi-billion-dollar estate, and in and out of jail for these years. But the thing is, he stole from the elderly. Come on, you talk about predator and praise. You know what happened to this guy? Had 3 sons. Number 1, number 2, number 3, they all died. Somehow. And one of them was medical, but the other 2 were suspicious. Come on. These kids were basically, they died because of what? Because of the father's transgressions. Because of the mother's transgressions. So to be able to look at a life and to realize you have been in like a little capsule in your life. And why you get these illusions and fantasies that it's your life, you're very individual with, and you're very determined, and you're very clear what you do, what you don't do. I'm sorry, but you know what? It hasn't been a personal life. You've been living out the curse that's been given to your father, and you haven't gotten out of that yet. Or the curse of the mother. And I've seen both sides. So now, what's the lesson in this? The lesson is that these archetypal stories, these universal stories, have a very specific meaning, and we often get embedded in that particular tale. And what it takes is a conscious relationship. So for somewhere like this, it's got to be some version of killing off the fathers. However it happens, some way of saying, you know what? I've never been able, says the patient, to say that I've done what I did because I was possessed. That moment, again, freeze frame that moment. When somebody realizes that they've been possessed and their actions are the actions of a field that they've been taken over by, do you realize where that's also a redemptive moment? To say that something took over your life. And this is another one of those major points in treatment. And I've seen this many times now, where when you begin to admit that your life has been taken over by something, maybe for the negative, maybe through the addictive experiences, maybe through the criminality, but you can't get, it's like you're in the bicycle in the groove and you just can't get out. It gets deeper and deeper and more severe consequences. But the moment one realizes that there's the beginning of a spiritual awakening, in a sense, with all the big words and whatever, to realize there's something more powerful than you that took over your life. That's one hell of a moment. So with the Oedipus story, I mean, how do we begin to unlearn or expand, if it's a better way of looking. How do you begin to expand? And part of the methodology is going back to the story. We had one of our graduates do a piece on Medusa. I read it again, and I was ashamed of myself after I read her paper. Some of you were in Portland, Oregon when she presented. It was just a brilliant piece of work. All this time, I took Perseus, right? He was a hero. He really helped Athena kill that damn crazy woman who turned men to stone. I want that kind of Perseus in me. And you look at Perseus and you look at all the attributes he had and say, isn't it great? Isn't it wonderful? And Athena, she's helping humanity. And she's championing this guy. I want my Athena. I want my partner to be my Athena, to champion me in my pursuits and all that. And we go on, and we got the story, right? Look at the Medusa. Look at that witch. You know, what she does to people. She turns them to stone, and you have to use a reflection to look at her. You can't look at her directly. How many people has she killed, that witch, what she did? Our student did this really brilliant, Terry Wagner, a brilliant piece of work, and she said basically, like the story of Oedipus, does anyone know this story? Yeah, and stories I just told us what most of us know, right? That's not the story. There's a much deeper story where Athena was in competition with Medusa, because Medusa was also a very beautiful woman who captured the fancy of, is it Poseidon? Yeah, he captured his fancy. That wasn't acceptable in the temple of Athena. So she plotted to do something about it. There ain't room in this town for the two beauties. Thus began the deconstruction of a beautiful woman. Medusa is not an evil woman. Perseus is no hero. And Perseus is a demigod. I mean, he's a demigod. He's born of human and divine parentage. What happens when we begin to pull back the veil of this stuff and say, oh my God. I mean, I love these moments, and I don't feel great about them. I never thought about it. It never dawned on me. It never dawned on me to ask. And I assumed, whether it's, we just want to see bad things about the feminine, the ongoing oppression of the feminine, which is Laura Lee's a very wonderful program she put together with Seeing Red, some of you are part of. Whether it's the ongoing need for the men to degrade women is part of it. But we don't ask the questions. I mean, we didn't need to just stop and look at Oedipus as a guy who sleeps with a mother. I mean, what does that really give us? There's no great secondary gain for us to say that's really served by someone who sleeps with his mother. I think there's more of a fear. It's a really deep, I think, collective fear of understanding the archetypal roots of these stories. And you know what? It takes a lot out of us. It takes a lot more to get underneath the story. To take a story, any myth, any fairy tale, any spiritual story, and understand it through our own particular lens, it doesn't take any work. That's why I find it absolutely incredulous that so much of modern dream work has really become, whether you want to admit it or not, has become studies in subjectivity. We stop with Oedipus is about this, and Medusa is about this, and Salome is about that, and we stop and we rest on those laurels. I got it. I know the story. And I feel it in my own life. Me and my mother, one could say me and my mother, me and my father. I had the issues with whatever. We had the witchy aunt like Medusa. We had Aunt so-and-so. She was like Medusa in my family. And we stop. And do you realize how every time we stop, and this is where I think we need to take it on a bigger level, what's the archetypal inference of stopping in this story? It becomes more of a totemizing of our complex and a totemizing of the subjective ego. It's anti-individuation. You want some big words to it? It's really anti-individuation. Where, come back to Jung and the pillars of this. And I'm not trying to glorify them because I need to. I think it was because they were so brilliant, so ahead of their time. So when a Jung or von Franz would say, what's the original story? And then, why would this person have the dream of Oedipus? Got it? The next part. Why would this person have a dream of Medusa? Or I don't know why. I'm just thinking Medusa so much lately. I don't know why. Let me get my hair done. I want some curls. No, I'm being sorry. But the point may be, it may not even be a dream, but something's making them think about it. Right? Or I saw a boat. It's called Medusa. Or in Sicily, Medusa is the jellyfish. I'm thinking of the Medusa, the jellyfish, whatever. So, but the point is, it's still it's still come to you. That's part of the gift. That the image has come to you and saying, for some reason, the field, my language now, the archetypal field of Medusa is now constellated. Jung's term, absolutely brilliant. The field of Medusa is constellated in the psyche of this woman. The field of Oedipus is constellated in the psyche of this man or this woman. And again, we do our gymnastics and all about what do you think, feel, whatever. When we then come back and say, you know what, there is a story. In the same way those musicians know that there are dominants of these different chords. If you haven't read the book, check out Zuckerkandl. He's one of the few people that wrote about archetypal composition of music. Certain chords, what they do. I mean, you play those like G minor 7 to F minor 7 to F minor, you feel pretty romantic. And you start looking around and saying, it gets you. You play Flight of the Valkyries, not a romantic night. It's not going to work. But what he does, Zuckerkandl does in his work, he looks at how each of these particular harmonics are related to particular archetypes, which is why Wagner's Flight of the Valkyries has the effect on people because it's that archetypal issue coming through in that particular musical composition. And the same with the more love stories or whatever. Bacio y mucho. I mean, who could not? My father proposed my mother with that song, 70 years ago, 60 years ago. It has that effect on you. So it's a very different approach to psyche when we say, okay, there is a particular and there is an inherent story embedded in this. Okay. And this individual, now here's the next part, that this individual is now in the field. So all those attributes, for better or for worse, of that story, of the Oedipus story, the Salome story, the Medusa story, have now befallen in this individual. And the story is describing something major about their life. And again, please, I'm aware of all the counter arguments, well, what about, and all the variations and all that. But again, if we have the person coming to you with the Oedipus story, I'm looking at where this is about the sins of the father or the mother in that whatever case. And how many times have we seen these stories of men and women that grew up as these whether blatant alcoholics or whatever, and you realize they never left. The umbilicus never got cut. And they're still living attached to this field. Then the image comes and gives you this incredible gift. That somehow the image comes and often is able to tell us by virtue of a story, something we just couldn't grasp. That's one of the things I love about the dream. You're wrestling, I know it's an issue around X or Y, something about the fathers and whatever. And then the story comes, and my God, I got it. It never dawned on me that this is really, the person never really dealt with the father's transgressions or the mother's transgressions. I mean, we've all heard of cases where people have been involved with analysts that committed terrible transgressions, and you find almost their entire practice, almost all the patients that are involved with somebody that's been involved in these transgressions, many of the patients get involved in their own transgressions. Now, it's chicken and egg story. Well, there is a symmetry. There is a coherence as to why one is drawn to the other. But you realize then that you're caught. And this is where I'm going with this. The bigger issue is the galvanizing effect of the archetype on the individual. It's not the individual which is primary. It's the archetype which is primary. It's the primacy of the archetype which is the basis of Jung's work. Then we see how the individual often lives that out in a way that's not conscious, but by virtue of a possession, they live this stuff out. So what's our work? And I'll wrap up a little bit. Our work is trying to understand the stories in their own right. Understand that piece of music. You know, why Bachame Mucho? Why is it so powerful for so many people? You want to dance, you want to kiss, you feel romantic. Why have we not taken these stories further? Little Red. I mean, one of our graduates, Katrina Hopkins, did a wonderful piece of work on the story of Little Red. We hear that story, Little Red Riding Hood, as the big bad wolf did this terrible thing. She did this incredible piece of research to show that the wolf was a ritual for feminine initiation. In the early time, I think it was from the French culture. The French, I think the original Little Red was French, a French version of that story, where the old women would be the initiates of the young girls, dressing up as wolves. So it's not, in that sense, a story of the killing of the little girl, the slaughter, the incest. And again, you see, what we do is we just stop. We stop. And I'm guilty. I don't say guilty, but I'm no different. I stopped at Oedipus. I stopped at Medusa. I stopped at Little Red Riding Hood. The beauty of Jung's work and of von Franz's work and of any approach that partakes of looking at universal patterns, it's urging us to get beyond our subjectivity, to acknowledge it, to live with it, but then say there's another story. And I think we got a really great weekend planned. The faculty we have is going to be doing it through movies. Max Golder's coming. He did the movie Beauty, a new version of Beauty and the Beast, you know? And look at these stories. I mean, how is it the story of Beauty and the Beast, Amor and Psyche, has been with us from the beginning of time? And it's not just, it's a story out there, but what men do we see in the real world are caught in that drama because they can't separate from the mother. You see, and I think it's hard to find the right word to describe the profundity of this stuff. The profundity that there is a beauty in the beast. There is the young son or the daughter that gets possessed and cursed by the mother or father, and they live as the beast. And as we see in these stories that there are rites of passage you have to go through in order to break the possession. This ain't no different from our lives. So whether you're looking at Neumann's developmental model, whether you're looking at these great old timers looking at fairy tales, you realize that not only it's a commentary on the story, but it's also a recommendation of how to find redemption. How do you begin to, when the birds helped Psyche, do the tasks? What does it mean? When Hansel and Gretel found their way out of the old woman's furnace in her house. These are stories about possession and domination by the great mother, the great and terrible mother. This has been with us from the beginning. It affects people's lives. So whether you're thinking about that story, if you begin doing an analysis of somebody, you realize, my God, their story is like Beauty and the Beast. They never get out from under the mothers. They're still cursed that way. The beauty of the beast, right? This beauty and the elegance and all that he has to offer has been cursed by the mother because he can't get free. Is that just a work in fairy tales? It's real life. You know the life a little bit of Anton Saint-Exupéry, excuse my horrible French, but the author of The Little Prince. He lived in such a world of the devouring mother. Here he was, this pilot, he's a bush pilot, and he wrote the book after another time he actually crash landed, he did many times. Well, the backstory is what happened to his mother every time he crashed. Every time he crashed, they would go to the mother and say, Mrs. Saint-Exupéry, we have some terrible news for you. We can't find your son. Oh my God, we can't find your boy. He must be down. It's been a week now. And she would shroud the house in black, and everyone would come, Mrs. Saint-Exupéry, we're so sorry. They bring flowers, they bring this, they bring all this stuff. And that would go on until they say, somebody comes then knocking on the door and says, guess we got great news for you. We found your son. And they said every time they found the boy, she went into a terrible depression. I mean, is that so far from Beauty and the Beast? How many men or how many women are unable to get out from under the power of this devouring mother figure, devouring father figure? So here's the wrap-up piece, is that these different fairy tales and myths are telling us about the different variations of the human condition in ways that are often not so pretty. And they're telling us about real life, and they're saying, in the field of the mother that takes over the daughter's life or the son's life, these are stories where you see what it looks like. And these are some of the things that has to happen. Sometimes they got to go and kill the mother off in fairy tale. And what that then means psychologically. And that's where the work of translation comes in. How do you translate that when somebody's got to go and they got to kill off the mother then? It's not killing really. It's a liberation from. It's an individuation from. How do you do when you find out the father has been secretly undermining the girl, the daughter, or the son? How many fairy tales do we find in the story? And I'll leave you guys with one last story. One of my favorite fairy tales. And it's called The Boy Who Fed the Crucifix. Some of you know the story. It's an Italian fairy tale. Italo Calvino did it in a book called Italian Fairy Tales. And it begins with a farmer finding a boy on the side of the road, an abandoned boy. So if you look at this a la Von Franz, the story opens and it tells you an archetypal story. What's the beginning? It's about the masculine. It's a young boy who's been abandoned. So we see it's about the young, abandoned, masculine attitude. And where Von Franz is at her best, and this is all part of the Von Franz seminar series, is she'll look at the opening of a story and she'll tell you, as any great musician would say, if we're starting here, it's likely we're going to have some of these pieces in the music at some point. She would say, inevitably, there's got to be something that's going to enter the story to give redemption, which is going to be what? If you got a father, son, redemption is going to come at the hands of what? The feminine. Now, is it formulaic? Well, I don't think it's formulaic. I think it's understanding the nature of psyche. Long story short, the father raises the boy, the stepfather, whatever, he loves his child. Keeps him on a farm, that's their life, but one day they got to go to the town Catania in Sicily. And the father says, look, I got to go do business, good negotiation, sell some of the grain, whatever. Why don't you just wait for me in the church? What's church? Well, he explains a little bit about what church is, because the kid had never been off the farm. So the little boy goes into the church, and he's alone in there, and he sees this terrible thing. He sees somebody hanging on a cross. And he starts talking to the figure. Ma tu sei solo? Are you alone? Sì, sono solo. I'm alone. E fa freddo? You cold? Sì, faccio freddo. And he gives him his sweater. The guy in the crucifix. He says, tu sei fame? Sì, ho fame. You hungry? Yeah, I'm hungry. And the guy who runs the church, not the priest, but one of the orderlies, whatever, hears this, and he's bringing the boy a bowl of pasta and a glass of wine. So the boy's got it, and then he looks at it and says, I'm fine, no, I'm hungry. He says, you know what, you take this. So he gives the food and the wine to the guy on the cross. And they begin talking. And the orderly calls the priest and said, there's something very, very bizarre going on here. This boy is talking, and the cross is speaking back to him. And they go on, have a conversation. All of a sudden, the boy dies. And the priest said, he must be a saint, this kid. The story is a very powerful story because it really is a redemption of Christianity in many ways. It's also very powerful for us in the Jungian field. Because at that point, prior to the boy's entrance into the church, what was that crucifix? He was a piece of stone, a piece of wood, lifeless. And the priest basically would say, what are you doing? It's just a piece of wood. It's not alive. Why are you talking? Are you crazy? But the boy somehow knew that symbol, you see where I'm going? That symbol was alive and vital. He spoke to it. He knew it was hungry. It was alone. It was cold. It wanted a glass of wine with the pasta. The boy was the innocence of the young kid that recognized the living reality of psyche. Where organized religion, organized psychology, organized all this stuff has made these empty, dead images and rituals. And look, I kind of hate to say it, but not so much, that these images become deadened the more we drain them of their own authentic identity. We killed something about it. There's something so humble what that kid did. He approached it. What's it in the Buddhist language? Naive heart, or what's it called? Something like that. Simple mind, whatever the words are. He approached it with a simplicity, and he never questioned if it was real or not. At that moment, he saw the living soul of this thing. What this weekend is about, and what I hope that I was able to introduce a little bit, or remind you about, not even introduce, but remind you, is the tremendous living, breathing reality of these stories and myths to teach us about archetypal reality. That's real and vital. They're not just empty icons, which is what we make them when we just kind of drain the cup and we just fill it with our own imagination. There was a great whiskey in that cup. There was a great glass of wine. There was a really great Colombian coffee in that cup. Can you respect that? And the last question that goes with this is why have we taken the life out of these images? Why did it take the boy? Why did he have to die? Because I think he died because almost one could not carry that profundity into the world. How do you carry that sense of the numinous in the world every day? And I think it's something we all struggle with. And one of the ways we get away from that is we start, again, draining the cup, draining the image of what belongs in it, what's innate in it. And I can't say enough about the gift and the heritage that we have moved into by having the tremendous contributions of Jung and the Jungians. By helping us see that Oedipus is not just about sleep with the mama. Medusa is not just about some damn witchy woman who kills people. Salome is not just a dancing siren trying to kill people off. But when you have the courage to go somewhere else with it and you ask, okay, who are you? What are you? And that's what the Jungian said, get into the skin of the image. Get into the skin. What is that music? And maybe for you the music does this, for you the Celtic does that, but there's something inherent about the Celtic tones, for instance, that hits many people very, very deeply. It's not just Dominique or whomever it is, or Alan Stivell or Fare Thee Well. I've listened to that song for the past month. I've just every day, Fare Thee Well. I forget it. Davies does that song. Again, great artist, Celtic artist. It hits something. And that's why I love that fairy tale. Because it reminds us that A, it's alive, and B, we have to engage with it. And hope to God we don't have to die when we carry that reality out. So with that, I say thank you. I know it's very warm in here. We're trying to get some air conditioning going on here. So any questions? Any questions or anything you want to bring up? I have a water slide.
Just the name of the guy that wrote about the Michigan archetype.
Zucker candle. Zucker, like sugar candle. Zucker candle. Zucker candle.
So we lose that sense of mystery. That's what was lost in the whole church scene of the Conforti. And this is the meaning of we must become as little children to enter the kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you approach an image or a myth or a story and become like that, like that little kid, you say, what's in the story? And to have the courage to go back and say, when we stop the deifying of the conscious ego. I mean, look, we need the ego to get around, and hopefully we develop a good ego to make it in life. Our kids, get a job, and you got to deal with life, and you got to deal with the bosses and hierarchy. That's all part of life and all that stuff. You need it. So it is not trying to kill off but when you realize there's this other piece, like that cross, to get beyond it, to get into that skin of it. And it takes a lot. And look, the other thing is you realize with this program, and that's why, one of the wonderful things about the residencies is we have people graduating each time. And you see them contribute what they did with this work. And I continue to stand both proud and satisfied when I see the level of work coming out of this. The work on Medusa, the work on Salome, the work on these different myths, and see, my God, you really got to the heart of the issue. And what I say to people that are graduating, let's say it's the image of the Black Madonna, one of our graduates did it on that. I said, okay, if somebody had a dream of this, what are they dreaming of? Okay, what would the dream be about? What field is the dreamer being brought into if it's a dream of the Black Madonna? What field are they being brought into if someone dreams of Solomon? The dancers say, they're even a dancer. I danced, we did the dance of Solomon, I danced through, whatever. You're being brought into a field. And again, it's easy for us to stop our work on the conventional. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so let's take a little break at noon. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about the heat in here, so we try to get the air conditioner, something going very well. You got to be sweltering with that.
Yes, I invited everyone online.
Thank you for being part of this today, and give us a call if you have any questions. I see there's some questions there.